Do you struggle with self-worth? Do you sometimes feel that you're not as good as people think you are, or at least not as good as they expect you to be? If you do, then you're not alone, and maybe you have something people refer to as imposter syndrome. It is actually quite common that high-achieving people at world-class institutions struggle to fit in from their own point of view. And they feel that everybody around them is much better than they are. And so everybody belongs there but them. They don't deserve to be there, and they're there by accident. And sooner or later, people will find out that they are a fraud. They're not supposed to be there, but somehow they got there because people thought that they were better than they are in reality. And so this is really a psychological and mental condition, and people lately have been referring to this as imposter syndrome. Quite interestingly, when you develop something like this, it's not easy to get over it, because ultimately it's about you thinking that you're not as good as people think that you are. And if you open up and talk to someone, which would be one of the possible ways of dealing with the problem in normal circumstances, in this case, it doesn't really help, because the other person will be telling you that, oh, you should forget about this because you are as good as everybody thinks. You are really good and you do belong here. But them telling you this triggers in you the opposite reaction, because you start thinking, oh no, this is happening again because people think I'm much better than I am actually. And this is not a small problem, because it can eat at you from the inside constantly, to the point that you can develop actually serious mental health issues. Because wherever you go, whatever you do, this is always at the back of your mind. And you're thinking that people will eventually find out that you don't belong here, and then they will send you away. In a way, this becomes a form of self-sabotage. And it can be a self-fulfilling prophecy, because eventually you may do something quite stupid that actually results in you having to leave. So from this perspective, it's actually obvious that you need to get over this. But how do you do that? Of course, one of the most powerful ways of getting over this is time. You just bite the bullet, keep working, and eventually maybe you start believing that you actually belong in that place, especially if you have been there for years. And there's, of course, counseling and therapy, so you might find a professional to help you deal with these issues. And what I'm saying here is obviously not medical advice, it's just a reflection on my own experience, having seen these things and sometimes having felt a little bit like that. So one of the things you should remember that you're not alone in this. I remember some statistics according to which almost half of the people who work at Google experience this problem. And the same is obviously happening at top universities, where the competition to get in, to get funded, or to get a job is extreme, and the pressure is very high. So when you see these intensive places at work, you may think that everybody's coping with it perfectly fine, and you're the only one who's having difficulties with the pace. If you talk to other people, they will probably tell you that they're struggling with the same thing. Not everybody would admit that they have something like imposter syndrome, but they will probably say that they find the pace difficult and there's too much on their plate. And the other aspect of this is that in these high-achieving places, you always have these people who've done something exceptional, something quite out of the ordinary. For example, here in Cambridge, you have plenty of people who've been teaching and working here for the past centuries, who've done something incredible, who've made an impact on history or the development of science. Think about Isaac Newton, who was here in the 17th century. His contribution to the development of modern science is unparalleled. But you can also reverse this perspective, because if you think about it, Newton made a number of important discoveries in the year when he was away from Cambridge, when the university was shut because of the plague, and he returned to the countryside to his mother's house. So even Newton could not have made these important contributions while teaching at Cambridge. So he needed a break to be able to think, to work, and to produce something monumental. Okay, so let's look at this imposter syndrome in a bit more detail. If you talk to people who are affected by this, one of the common themes they mention is they dread to be found out. They fear that others will find out the truth about them. So quite often it's really about what other people think of you. So maybe it's not so much about you, it's about your connection or your relationship with other people. But it's also possible that you yourself feel that you're not good enough. You strive to be somebody or something, you always feel that you're failing, you're not reaching that potential. And that can eat at you from the inside too. But in both cases, there's a discrepancy between what you think of yourself or what you suspect about yourself and who you should be or who you aspire to be. And this image of yourself is probably not entirely true because you're probably a little bit higher or maybe much higher than what you think about yourself. What strikes me as interesting is that in most of these cases, you think about yourself in a static manner. So you have a level of knowledge or skills or expertise which is here. And then the desired level is somewhere above that. And what you're typically not thinking about is how to close this gap. And I think this is what you should maybe be focusing on. So instead of falling into despair because you're here and you're supposed to be here, or everybody thinks that you're here, maybe it's more productive to start thinking about how to catch up. So if you say, yes, I'm here, that does not mean that you can never be here, right? When you finish high school and you go to university, it's obvious that it's going to be different. The university represents a much higher level of learning. So there's nothing wrong about you not being at that level yet. And when people accept you to come here, it means that they see the potential in you. And there's quite a bit of effort directed at bringing out that potential in you. So you need to develop, you need to up your knowledge, up your skills. And this is what universities are about, actually. And the same is true if you're already on a career path. When people hire you with a fresh diploma, they don't expect someone who's as good as the top scholar in the field. Instead, they see a potential in you. They see a promise. And of course, they're willing to help you to develop to that potential. Because once you're hired, you're part of the team. So it's in everybody's interest that you perform better. So I think one of the ways to resolve this imposter syndrome is to move out of the fixed mindset and start thinking in terms of the growth mindset. So if you feel that there is this discrepancy, then no problem. You should be grateful that you have a chance to be in an environment where you can learn, where you're not the best. And so you can develop much more rapidly. And the shift from the fixed mindset to the growth mindset, I think, is extremely important because who you are now is not necessarily the same as who you will be in a year or in 5 years. I hope it's not, because we all aspire to develop and to become better and to learn new skills. Okay, so what's the takeaway here? One of the things is that you're not alone, and other people around you have similar thoughts, doubts, and problems. Number two, that even if there is a gap between who you are and who you should be, you can close that gap by learning, by working at it. So instead of freaking out, saying, wow, I'm not who they think I am, you should work on becoming the person they think you are. And number three is people who accepted you or hired you know that you're not at that level yet. In most cases, they didn't hire a world-class expert, but they hired a promise, somebody who could become that. And so you should live up to those expectations and work at developing yourself further. Okay, so these are my thoughts on what we call imposter syndrome. Let me know if you have experience with this and how you dealt with the problem. Hope this was useful. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.